Late February 2026 will likely be remembered as the moment global markets collectively spilled their double-double coffee and rediscovered a basic truth: maps matter. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz is not just another headline designed to compete with celebrity scandals or election gossip. It is a reminder that 21st century globalization still runs on geography. Globalization still runs on 20th century shipping lanes. Policymakers spoke of energy transitions, but in the end, nearly one-fifth of the world's oil still squeezes through a narrow strip of water. For decades, Iran suggested Hormuz could be used as leverage. It was often dismissed as diplomatic theater. This time, the tone shifted from "we could" to "we did." Markets do not panic because of speeches. They panic because ships stop moving. The global energy system suddenly appears astonishingly concentrated. Decades of interdependence have produced efficiency, but not immunity. When one choke point falters, supply chains tremble. Not collapse, not yet, but tremble just enough to remind investors that the invisible hand of the market sometimes needs GPS. In an era where sanctions have become routine, the closure of Hormuz flips the script. It transforms economic pressure into geographic pressure, targeting the bloodstream of industrial civilization: energy transit. Global powers have debated multipolarity, yet a single maritime corridor drawn by tectonic forces now dictates the tempo of global diplomacy. That is structural vulnerability. Meanwhile, governments publicly reassure their populations. There are reserves, they say. There are buffers. There are contingency plans. Which is true, for now. But energy markets are governed by expectations. And expectations, like winter in Ottawa, can change quickly. What makes this turning point so consequential is the slow realization that leverage has shifted to Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing. This is no longer about rhetoric. It is about operational credibility. When a regional power can influence global energy flows in real time, the diplomatic conversation changes. Negotiations become less abstract. Statements become more cautious. Allies become more attentive. In short, the world has been reminded that supply chains are physical, and physics does not negotiate. Subscribe to the Refoundation. In the next part, we examine why this narrow maritime corridor holds such disproportionate power. If globalization were perfectly engineered, no single corridor would unsettle it. And yet, here we are. The Strait of Hormuz is not vast. What gives it power is concentration. Nearly 18 to 20 million barrels of crude oil per day transit through this passage, along with a portion of liquefied natural gas. That figure represents the daily fuel intake of major economies across Asia and Europe. In practice, the system remains dependent on strategic choke points. Hormuz is the most sensitive. Navigational channels are narrow. Massive supertankers must move through precisely defined lanes. This is a high-stakes logistical corridor where precision replaces flexibility. Energy markets function on predictability. When uncertainty enters the equation, the entire system begins to price in risk. Risk translates rapidly into cost. For years, leaders emphasized diversification, all valid, but they require time, infrastructure, and coordination. They cannot be improvised during a disruption. The strait is a timing regulator. There is also a psychological dimension. Once shipowners perceive risk, behavior adjusts. This is leverage through calculated uncertainty. Moreover, the strait sits in a militarized environment. Naval forces operate in proximity. Strategic signaling is routine. Even minor incidents can escalate perception. The seriousness lies in this combination: high-volume dependency, narrow constraints, limited alternatives, and military sensitivity. Globalization magnifies vulnerability. Doubts can be as disruptive as closure. If geopolitics is chess, energy markets are high-frequency poker. They react to signals and price uncertainty faster than governments can draft press releases. Volatility has entered a phase of calculation. Traders understand duration and credibility. A temporary slowdown can be absorbed. But ambiguity has a shelf life. The longer vessels delay, the more futures reflect structural concern. This time, tracking data provides evidence. Vessel slowdowns, rerouting. When numbers replace speeches, skepticism weakens. Interrupt expectations, and financial models recalibrate. Consider freight rates. As risk rises, charter costs increase. Insurers multiply fees. Each layer adds cost. What begins as a maritime issue evolves into a macroeconomic variable. The most revealing indicator is the shape of the futures curve. When near-term contracts spike, markets are signaling short-term supply anxiety. When longer-term ones climb, structural disruption is priced in. Traders monitor naval movements in real time. Markets act as geopolitical seismographs detecting tremors before politicians do. There is an ironic restraint visible. For now, if markets measure anxiety in price, insurance measures it in spreadsheets. Recalculation is taking place in London, Singapore, and New York. Actuarial tables have little patience for optimism. Remove stability, and it wobbles. The variable is no longer legality, it is insurability. War risk insurance depends on quantifiable risk. Once incidents accumulate, insurers reassess exposure. Premiums have multiplied for some fivefold. For a supertanker, insurance is a central operational cost. Multiply it, and the economic rationale shifts. This is where geopolitics intersects with arithmetic. Shipping firms operate on margins. Surge premiums ripple outward. There is a psychological threshold. Once enough companies reroute, collective behavior reinforces the perception of closure. Once enough actors believe it is unsafe, it effectively becomes so. Time in supply chains is currency. Shipping is adaptive. Routes adjust quickly, but each adaptation increases cost and time. Irony is how trade remains vulnerable to geography and force projection. Once discomfort crosses thresholds, policy matters less than premium invoices. Part 5. Governments respond. When insurers multiply premiums, governments follow, not always with clarity, but with urgency. Public statements emphasize stability. Private discussions focus on escalation limits. For the US, the strait is a strategic artery. Deterrence is a balancing act. European governments advocate de-escalation while intensifying contingency plans. Asia importers face immediate exposure. Gulf states depend on export flows. Russia occupies an ambiguous position, leveraging the crisis to reassert influence. Iran's historical leverage over the strait has shifted from shadow to substance. The crisis reveals the enduring power of strategic signaling. Geography retains the final word. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not over. It is a lesson in leverage and interdependence. Subscribe to the Re Foundation for more analysis.